Well, that was nice.
Jordan Peterson has become one of the most influential speakers in the world.
But you're exercising your freedom of speech to certainly risk offending me.
His talks on social issues and controversial topics have earned him millions of followers and plenty of critics.
Well, if you're the person with the answer, why did you have to formulate the question?
Appearing on some of the biggest TV shows and podcasts in the world, he's not one to shy away from the big topics.
Do you think there is a God?
I'm terrified that there might be, Pierce. How's that?
But his own personal life has been coloured by health struggles, the pressure of fame, and more recently, the devastating news that his wife Tammy, of 35 years, had terminal cancer. In this interview, I sat down with Jordan Peterson in his home to ask how he reacted when his wife was given just 10 months to live.
When you lose your wife, you don't just lose your wife, you lose your children's mother. Well, I would lose a friend.
And what he makes of the fact that she started to pray every day and incredibly is now cancer-free.
The fact that she survived was very unlikely. But the fact that she survived and she predicted when she was going to recover, that's a harder thing to wave away.
We talk about his view of the miraculous.
I think we would see the miraculous constantly if we weren't blind. I think we do see it constantly and are blind.
And I ask Jordan, as his wife is now becoming a Catholic, if it's something he feels drawn to as well.
Towards the Catholic Church?
Towards the Catholic faith. My name is Colm Flynn, and this is a one-on-one interview with Jordan Peterson. Jordan Peterson, it is great to meet you.
Thank you.
Bring us back to that day when you were sitting in the office with your wife and the doctor told you terminal cancer, 10 months to live. What goes through your mind?
Well, I suppose the first thing that went through my mind was anger, because anger is an easy emotion to turn to in the immediate aftermath of devastating news. So, and grief is an emotion, or terror even, is an emotion that takes a longer while to settle in. And
terrified of the inevitable, that you were going to lose your wife of 35 years.
Well, when you lose someone, when you lose your wife, you don't just lose your wife, you lose the future that you had conjured up and conceptualized. You lose your children's mother. You lose, well, I would lose a friend, a great friend, and so that in itself obviously turns things upside down. We switched very rapidly into active mode, I would say, and started traveling around from physician to physician, hospital to hospital, as we were fortunate to be able to do.
So going through your mind was, no, there has to be a way. We're getting this dreadful diagnosis, but no, there's got to be something.
There was no reason for us not to seek out to search every nook and cranny. And so that's what we did. We traveled to a number of hospitals in a number of different provinces and states, and to also be assured that we understood the situation as accurately as possible. It's always a good idea to get a second opinion or a third opinion. And the opinions we did receive were that the second diagnosis was accurate, and that the situation was hopeless, that there was no real point in radiation or chemotherapy or surgery.
Did you and Tammy talk about death, about her dying?
No, not really. We were so concerned with immediate emergency practicalities that the more metaphysical aspect of things never arose. And one of the things you need to do when you're confronted by dreadful news is to shorten your time frame immediately. Otherwise it's overwhelming, right? So if the thoughts of the next year or 5 years are inconceivably threatening, then you concentrate on the next week. And if that's too much, then the next day. And you can get to the point, if you're really unfortunate, where you concentrate on the next minute. And so our time frame shrunk pretty dramatically and pretty immediately. And
even you on your own, maybe late at night, perhaps not talking to Tammy about it, but would it come into your mind, that big final question?
That had been in my mind for decades.
Did it make you think about it a different way now that Tammy...
Well, more immediate. I mean, it made it more immediate because this particular death would have been a catastrophic personal loss. And so that brings it home in a way that it can't be brought home merely on philosophical grounds, let's say.
When Tammy started to pray and was claiming she got comfort from prayer.
Hey, whatever works.
Were you praying as well?
I always pray.
You always pray?
Well, I learned back in 1982 to feel out my words and to see if they were solid. And that's a kind of meditative exercise. And it's a way of assessing whether what you're saying is in accord with the truth, and deeper than that, that the truth is in accordance with, that the truth that you're attempting to serve is in accordance with the highest possible aim.
With Tammy's condition, did the prayer intensify, the praying?
No, I was pretty serious to begin with. I mean, and I'd also, I never, and still don't, really regard prayer as the act of asking God for a favor. That's a temptation. That's the first temptation Christ encounters in the desert. The devil entices him to ask God to have stones turned into bread. Well, the potential death of your wife, that's pretty heavy stone. You don't implore God for favors. You might ask for strength, courage, faith, all of that. You can't ask that the laws of the natural universe be suspended for your temporary convenience.
But isn't that the natural reaction?
Of course.
God, please spare my wife. Don't take her. Science, the natural world is telling you her time is up, 10 months. No one survives this cancer.
Well, I think that, in the Garden of Gethsemane, Christ himself asked for the cup to be taken away from his lips. I mean, it's perfectly understandable that people might hope and pray that there could be an alternative way, but the proper prayer is still, thy will be done.
Be done, yeah.
Right, period, no matter what. Right, and that's a high price, right? Because it means that things have to unfold the way they unfold, and that inevitably means death. At least it inevitably means death under some conditions. So you might pray for the strength to accept that without bitterness. That would be a good prayer. You might pray that you don't make a terrible situation worse. That would be a real good prayer when you're dealing with someone who's terminally ill and your own insecurities. Those sorts of thoughts.
And when you do pray, Jordan, who or what do you pray to, or do you visualize, or where do you focus it?
Truth, accuracy in speech, care in action, gratitude. That's the opposite of pride and arrogance. That's a hard thing to conjure up in the midst of a crisis. But if you have any sense, there are things to be grateful for in a crisis. Things can always be worse, and much worse. That's why hell's a bottomless pit, and you can certainly make them worse by having the wrong attitude in the face of catastrophe, no matter how justified.
But that despair and misery, I heard you on the podcast with Bishop Robert Barron, and you were talking about, a world with great darkness, there must be a great light. And you're surrounded with this darkness, your wife's, your own, your daughter's. And when you're praying and when you're trying to look for hope, that light, which you say must be in the world, what is that light to you?
Well, I can give you an example. I mean, when Tammy's mother died she died over a long period of time. She had frontal temporal dementia, which is a degenerative neurological disease and a particularly miserable way to check out of the world. Her father's character, the best parts of her father's character revealed themselves, which was quite the miracle to see, because he took care of her. He was quite the man about town. He recently passed away. I liked him a lot. He was quite the man about town, and not the world's most agreeable person. But man, he was stellar when he took care of her. It was something to see. And so that increased the affection and respect his children had for him. And then their whole family pulled together in consequence of their mother's demise and suffering. And that was definitely a light. A lot of the things that you take for granted, well, everything that you take for granted is a miracle that you don't see. But when you're about to lose something upon which much of you depends, you have the opportunity to see it for what it is. And that's a way of getting the beams out of your eye, let's say. So, and certainly Tammy discovered love, really, I would say, in some ways, for the first time, in a way. And that was mostly through her appreciation for what her existence and demise signified for her son. And that changed her life. So, that's a non-trivial gift. Now, it was hard won, but lots of non-trivial gifts are hard won. So
Tammy believes that light shone on her and her situation. Praying the rosary, something happened that is extraordinary, some might say miraculous. How has what happened to Tammy changed your view or understanding of what people call the miraculous?
Well, I could speak about it sort of prosaically to begin with. I've been writing in some depth about the Gospels recently, and about a quarter of the Gospels are devoted to stories of miraculous healing. And for anyone who's conventionally scientific in his or her thinking, those stories are hard to understand. She pulled out all the stops in her attempts not to survive, I wouldn't say, but to stop engaging in any activity that would be counterproductive to the possibility of her survival. And did that help? Well, you could certainly at least claim that it didn't hurt, and that if the odds are stacked against you, who knows what minor additional forces you might have to align behind you in order to maximize the possibility that you'll put the thread through the needle.
But minor, she is the only person in the world that we know of, is that true, that has survived this type of cancer?
They told us, and I looked, that the 1 year survival rate was 0. So, and it's very rare, right? That's this particular kind of cancer. And that was exactly what everyone we talked to told us too, all the hospitals. Generally speaking, physicians, especially specialists who have confidence in their specialty, will be optimistic about what they can do, but I wouldn't say that that's what we encountered when we went to the various hospitals that we went to. We went to the best hospitals in North America. We had the luxury of being able to do that. And they told us the same thing. It was always the same. 3 potential treatments, no evidence for success for any of the 3 or any combination. So, what do I make of that? I wouldn't say, for me, the fact of her success is evidence of the miraculous, perhaps any more than there's evidence of the miraculous around us all the time. But the one thing that was very strange to me, and I don't know how to understand, was that she told me about 3 months before she recovered that she believed that she would be well by our anniversary. And that's exactly what happened. And so that's, the fact that she survived was very unlikely. But, unlikely things happen. But the fact that she survived and she predicted when she was going to recover, that's a harder thing to wave away.
Because you come from a scientific background, Jordan. It is your bread and butter. You should be dismissing any idea of some kind of divine intervention. You should be saying from the get-go, that's off the cards.
Yeah, I
suppose. It's chance,
suppose,
it's luck, it's a coincidence.
Well, I think the proper scientific attitude is more the Occam's razor. The use of Occam's razor, which is always prefer the simplest explanation, right? And the miraculous is very rarely the simplest explanation. And I have less problem with it, I suppose, than many typical scientists. I'm not a reductive materialist. I think we would see the miraculous constantly if we weren't blind. I think we do see it constantly and are blind.
Blinded by everything.
Oh God. Sin, presumption, pride, arrogance, ignorance, willful blindness. The easiest miracle to apprehend is the miracle of your own stupidity, and that's a rather painful one to start with, but you probably have to start with that one.
That's a miracle that it can occur again and again
and again. Oh, that's
for
sure. And if you don't think that's a miracle, you haven't done much self-evaluation.
Because when you mentioned the miracles in the Bible, it was interesting. You paused, they're hard to, I thought you were going to say believe, but you said they're hard to understand.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, I don't separate belief from understanding. Not fundamentally.
I think myself, you can have faith and know something to be true or believe or hope it's true, but to try and understand the creator of the universe and the mysteries of the gospel, the mysteries of suffering in the world.
Well, that's the point at which, especially in relationship to, say, the problem of suffering per se, or the problem of evil, at some point, every question bottoms out in a mystery. And that's where the faith has to be. People laugh about the God of the gaps, but that we conjure up God to explain those things that we cannot yet explain. That's a very shallow dismissal of the fact of necessary faith. Faith is necessary in part because you don't know everything.
When you saw Tammy's newfound faith and now her conversion to the Catholic Church.
Deepened faith.
Deepened faith.
Mm-hmm. She had faith of a courageous sort before that. She certainly had faith in the truth.
But how have you seen a change in her?
Oh, she's got deeper. That's for sure. She has more faith in herself, which has enabled her to attempt things that she had forbidden herself before. Many things. She's speaking publicly, which she wouldn't have done before, although she may have liked to, even though she would have hidden that from herself, that desire. People hide even their desire to have their light shine, much less the light. They hide that from themselves, and that's lack of faith. They're afraid that if they admitted to the ambition and pursued it, it would come to naught. She's less troubled in her soul. That's a good way of putting it. She's recovered that state of childhood that Christ associates with the kingdom. And that's a remarkable thing to see, because I also knew her as a child. And so I can actually see that re-emerge. And that's quite the bloody miracle, that is.
The question for Tammy and for people of faith all over the world and all the different religions is it I know you've said before the Catholic faith is the closest people will get to sanity or to keep people sane.
That's sad to say.
But, that's it. Is this just some rules and guidelines that we need to keep us from despair?
Well, there's different levels of depth.
Or is there something more divine about this?
Yes, sure. Tammy had engaged in a lot of disciplinary practices prior to deepening her Christian faith, and those other disciplinary practices had their utility. All of that deepened partly as a consequence of her ordeal, and as it deepened, it took on a more Christian form. But I think that's inevitable, because what's deepest inevitably takes on a Christian form. Like, if you pursue any disciplinary endeavor, that will take you into the depths. If you pursue a multitude of disciplinary endeavors to the ultimate degree, that will take you to the final depths. And you'll discover what is to be discovered in the final depths. And that's the light at the end of the tunnel, I suppose. It's the darkness first, though.
Are we not inviting people to do that enough now? When we look at the Catholic Church and its decline in recent years, less young people going, less people signing up for a religious life. And since, you could say, the 60s...
Well, if it's all guitar and hippies, who the hell cares?
But since Vatican II, let's say in the 60s, the Church has been aiming to be more relevant, more welcoming. So what's the problem?
That's not working. It's shallow, obviously. Shallow and contemptible. It's supposed to be an invitation to the great adventure of life. What's the great adventure of life? Pick up your cross and follow me. That's a hell of an invitation, but that's the invitation. And the Church lost faith in that. We have to be relevant. Well, what's more relevant than that? As soon as you say that you need to be more relevant than that, what you're doing technically is putting something else above that. Well, that's not going to work, not if the original proposition was correct. And obviously the original proposition is correct. You might say, well, why obviously? Okay, well, Christ faced and triumphed over death and hell. And you might say, well, why is that relevant? And the answer is, because that's what you have to do. Right, and everyone, you're stuck with it.
So is the Catholic Church not challenging people enough
Definitely
now?
not enough, not by any stretch of the imagination. The gateway to paradise is barred by the cherubs who have swords that flame and turn every which way. Well, what does that mean? It means it's hard to get into the club, man. Anything that isn't worthy gets cut and burned away. Well, of course, that's hell, especially if you resist it. Really. And there's no sugarcoating that, and that isn't what people want anyways. Young people want an adventure. Why the hell do you think they're so concerned with saving the planet, which Pope Francis seems to be on about constantly, when he should be saving souls? That's how you save the planet, not by worshipping Gaia.
Do you think Pope Francis puts the emphasis in the wrong places sometimes?
Well, I gave you that example. I don't see, for the life of me, what the Catholic Church has to do with climate crisis. Just the formulation is wrong. The priority is wrong. You save the world one person at a time. It lacks faith in its own mission.
Let me ask you finally, Tammy, with her deepened faith, has felt this tug towards the Catholic Church, the Catholic faith, let's say, Catholicism. I know your studies on the Old Testament, those lecture series that you did, phenomenally successful. Your conversations with Bishop Barron and other people within the Catholic Church. Does any part of you feel a tug as well?
Towards the Catholic Church?
Towards the Catholic faith.
There's plenty of things the Catholic faith got right. So is there a tug towards it? There's an appreciation for it. So everybody has their own path. Tammy's on hers. I'm on mine.
Tammy Peterson, thank you very much for your time.
Did I get myself in enough trouble?